So welcome. So first of all, this is my first chance to kind of address all of the MBA students, a few here, but then hopefully lots more are going to watch it. And I'm thrilled to be here. I'm 2.5 months, I guess almost 3 months on the job. And I thought I'd tell you a little bit about my background. So for me, this is a dream job, very, very exciting. If you want to know, I was actually a candidate for the job the first time around, got through a couple rounds, but not very far. Second time's a charm. So maybe we'll get into that in our career development workshop in a few months. You never give up, right? And so this time around was much more successful and absolutely thrilled to be here. There's so many exciting things happening in the university, setting up in Portland, the success of the program. It's really, really great. And I can tell you, I'm pumped to really do as best as I can to help things grow forward. I'm Canadian, as you may have gathered. But I spent a lot of time in the United States at Stanford and Syracuse and Ohio universities, and then a number of Canadian universities, Ottawa, Laurentian, Ryerson, you may have heard from. My area of interest and background is in the business of sports. So I have a marketing PhD, I have an accounting designation, but I do a lot of my stuff in sport. It's got 16 books and a whole bunch of articles, and I'll touch on those and some of the things as we kind of go forward. And you can see some other pieces there in terms of my background. And so that's really who I am. And so I think it's nice to know when you start a talk or who the dean of the program is, a lot of backgrounds. The other thing I just wanted to highlight a little bit is I'm certainly not your typical academic. I'm very, very engaged in industry. I do a lot of consulting, a lot of legal expert witness work. That stuff's going to go down a little bit when you're a dean because you get a lot more busy. I've also got a background working in industry, in biotech, in sport, in government. I've done a lot of different things in taxation with my accounting background in terms of those expert witness things we've done. A lot of my research, and most of it, in fact, has been with students. Connor's on a few projects with me. It's very applied. We want to work with organizations and do some cool things. My background, I was an athlete. I was also a coach, I was also an administrator, and those kind of pieces before I kind of came forward. So a little bit about that. In my travels, and I'm going to get a little bit more into this in the career management development workshop. And I mean, most of you are in good jobs but are looking, as we all are, to continue to further your career, whether it's internally or externally. And so I've had quite a pathway and been to some really neat spots all around the world, been to Olympic Games and taught in different countries and had some really, really neat experiences. And that's really, I think, led me to be able to have an opportunity like this to be a dean. And so that there's kind of a picture of some of the places I've been and where you want to go. In terms of MBAs, I've had lots of experience teaching at the MBA level. I'm not going to teach beyond these seminars in my first year. My boss, the provost, told me that because we have so much to do. But I will be getting engaged in teaching the following year. So this is what we kind of thought, and Connor helped with this, and Jamie, the assistant dean, she's on tonight too. What can we kind of do to get engaged with the students? And that's where we came up with this idea of this seminar series. We'll see how it goes. And we're hoping it's a chance for you to interact with me and me to interact with you and can build from there. But I've got lots of background at big programs, small programs, niche programs, US programs, Canadian programs, teaching at the MBA level in my travels. My research, as I mentioned, is very, very applied and focused and has been very, very successful. It's led me to a lot of neat things, a lot of cool opportunities, a lot of publications, as I mentioned, and books and industry opportunities. I just put a few of the brands and organizations there that I've had a chance to do research with, sometimes as coming in and helping them do things, sometimes as part of capstones with students, for instance, the NHL, sometimes as long-term research projects that funded many, many students doing different things, including MBAs, like PepsiCo, for instance. I had nearly a decade-long research project with them, a variety of different places. And I'm happy to talk about those, and we'll get into them as it goes forward. And the last thing I wanted to just pop on a little thing about me is I do have a bit of a life outside. I think a lot of you in MBAs we get so focused on our career and driven. I'm just like all of you, work late at nights and all that stuff. But there's a bit of balance there. And I have a family, and I like to do triathlons and climb mountains and all those kind of different pieces. I mentioned I write a lot of books, but they're very applied. I think there's some there. If you're ever interested in any of them, just let me know. We can help. And then I try, and a big plan and something the university wants me to do is to continue to be out there in the media kind of as a face of the program to help build our reach and our reputation. So now into the actual topic of the evening. And so this is another thing I have Connor to thank for this is the schedule. We kind of had this idea, we do it like a concert tour. I'm a lot less cool than you two or something, but we thought we'd do that same kind of idea. And so tonight is around presenting to win. And then the future ones are areas that I work in or interesting things. A recent book we published is one we're going to base on this, the next one on, which is on secrets of success for NCAA athletes. Connor and I are actually working on some research in the related area, and we're going to build through. So it's a mix of tactical content areas, which we think is not part of your MBA curriculum, things that I would have some expertise or background in, and then really tactical things like tonight, which is really about presenting. And so, there we go. So tonight is about presentation fundamentals, presenting to win, as we call it. So a lot of you know this stuff. A lot of you may be a bit rusty because of COVID. And I also tried to update the kind of talk here to be a bit more relevant for this kind of environment, right? A lot of us are presenting, really important. So I can tell you this dean's job I just got on, I had a 4-day interview, but multiple shorter rounds, but the final one was a 4-day interview like this. So I had to win this job, like a lot of you probably have done things in this environment. And so a lot of these skills and tactics that we're doing have to apply, or we have to alter them or do different kind of things in this kind of environment. And a lot of that's going to stay, as you all know. So really thinking about how do you present and to win a contract, to win a job, to win a new relationship, to win a new partnership, to win a new supplier, to win a negotiation, down the list we go. So we're being very, very focused in presenting with that particular outcome in mind. And the first thing we always say to ourselves when you sit down to present in these kind of things, and you've heard all these notions, right? You're in the elevator with the CEO, you've got 45 seconds to get their attention. You pitch your venture capitalists, which I did for a part of my career. Very, very challenging. You've really got 90 seconds to get their interest. I remember pitching to some of these properties, these VCs, and they would book 4 entrepreneurs every 10 minutes. And they would have them all sitting in different rooms because they know they would walk in and out of each room every minute because they just weren't interested. So you have to hook people right away. So do you need a story? How do you have to have a story? Do you want to have a story? And the answer to this one, and a lot of things we're going to be ambiguous, we're going to talk about so far, is very clearly yes. So you storyboard what you want to get across. And anytime you read a great story, right, like a book, you think of a great book you've read, whether it's a Harry Potter book, for instance, you are hooked in the first paragraph of the first page. And if you're not, often you put that book down. It's the same kind of notion. So, and I'm going to give you some tricks and some tactics in a little bit. A lot of you may know this, but very, very important that you've thought about a story that you're going to tell when you get that across. Now, how do you tell the story? And this is what I'm going to get into, doing these kind of pieces of being successful to do that. So I'm going to go through these 10 things that are kind of things I've learned along the way from others, et cetera, that are really interesting when you think about this. Number one, and hey, we're not in too much pressure tonight because Connor and I are here and we already have our jobs, but we're trying to win your support and hopefully win your word of mouth to tell others that, hey, this was worth listening to. So go download it. Or, hey, next time, why don't you come? Because this guy may have something reasonable to say. But you always want to be prepared for backups, especially like a job offer, these kind of things where it can all fall apart with some kind of technological glitch, one of your files doesn't work, something like that. Always have a backup. Step number one. Number two, and this is probably the most important one, and I personally in my consulting life and pitching life spend a lot of time working on this. And if you're a sports fan, it's easy. If you're not a sports fan, then check out ESPN. If you watch any of their sports center, so they run news shows every hour of every day, 7 days a week. Why the heck would people keep watching them? But anytime you watch the top of the hour, they always have this opening gambit. They always now have 2, usually. And even if it's a single host scenario, have some kind of a guest or show up some kind of a guest that they'll talk to back and forth. And they try to get your attention. Some kind of interesting story about Tom Brady's age and his wife was in the stands and this happened or whatever, just to get you excited. And it can be a joke. It can be an analogy I'm going to talk about in a second to draw the situation you're thinking about. But really think about setting the stage for your presentation going there. This has become way more important on Zoom because in Zoom, you're not only competing for their attention in the room and daydreaming, but on Zoom, you're competing for all the other screens they have access to. Like everybody, I can just turn my camera off and start working on other things I have to get done. So it's really, really challenging. So that opening gambit is a very, very important part of any great presentation. Another one is eye contact. And so we're getting away from this because we haven't been in these environments for a while, right? So it gets a little odd. And so when you're trying to really work with somebody to convince them to buy something, to hire you, whatever it is, you don't want to be the kind of person that's staring at someone. You don't want to always be looking off into space. You don't want to be staring at the ground. I mean, I have so many students that I've dealt with over the years that they may have brilliant content, but you can't even pay attention to it because they're like lost in space. So you want to practice eye contact. This has gotten even more important in the Zoom environment because you have to figure out your camera angles. Do you want to feel like you're staring at people? How do you kind of deal with those kind of pieces? Very, very important skill number 2. The analogy is the one I kind of mentioned before, is a nice thing to bring into your opening gambit. And it's where you kind of create some kind of comparison to something that's, unrelated to the topic of interest that you're trying to get across. So let's say, for instance, you're trying to pitch a new business. Let's say you've got a new aquaculture business, an aqua farm starting up, and you're trying to get some venture money from venture capital who invests in blue ocean aquaculture related things. Well, you may do some kind of an analogy to a farm. If this venture company doesn't have that kind of, you make some kind of analogy to Apple and how they started. You might kind of do some kind of an analogy to Microsoft and how they got going. Like something that really links you to something that got started in somebody's garage and ended up being a great success story. Just to set the stage, set the tone. Really useful things to do are analogies. You probably know this, and it's getting more and more common as, I've got 4 kids who are all fit in the millennial and next gen. It's all they care about. But what's in it for me, right? WIIFM, very common thing. And this is a huge mistake we all make in these pitches, is we get too focused on ourselves. Like, I want the job. I need to be thinking about what kind of candidate do they want to hire? Like, what kind of skills do I have that I need to address? And so if you think about the job pitch example, you go through, and I've learned the hard way like everyone, you go through the job description and you make sure you hit and exceed every single thing that they asked for in that description. You may have done it all, but we often, they'll check me out, they'll check my LinkedIn. Trust me, I'm on the hiring side a lot of time. We barely have time right now to even think about these things. So what's in it for me, thinking about the person you're presenting to, who's selling, buying, hiring, whatever the case may be, a very, very important one. Another one is to have a tactical approach. So how do you get from A to B? So that's storytelling we're talking about. There's some very simple things like, first, I'm going to tell you about the market opportunity. Second, I'm going to explain why my team is the group to do it for you. Third, I'm going to tell you about why the budget and the ROI, whatever. So you have a very clear story. And who's really good at this are people like talk show hosts. So if you ever watch, a David Letterman is one from the past, but any of these, all men, that's probably not a very good diverse slide. But this particular group, when you watch their shows and their interviews, Stephen Colbert is a great example. It's very clear. They've got a very stepwise approach. They've probably worked it out with the guests that they're interviewing, but a story is told in that 4, 5, 3, 9-minute segment as you work your way through. So think about how you're structuring and how you're kind of leading those piecework. The text, so your actual PowerPoint, Keynote, whatever you like to do, a Google Slides document that you have behind, you don't always need them. But it's really viewed now as pretty old school if you don't have some kind of graphical aid. But the graphical aid needs to be exactly that. It's the graphical aid. And if you Google great PowerPoint slides, great Keynote decks, whatever, you'll get a zillion different opinions, right? So the key thing is you got to be very strategic in every one you do. But there's a couple things that really, really important. Number one is you have to think about, like hopefully my slides are tonight, they're very simple, but they're very easy to read, right? Clear colors. If you have a graphic or a schematic, it comes across very easy to read. You want to do that. Always limit your bullets. So you never want to read. I think you all know that. So I'm not even going there, but you want to have a few very clear bullets and highlighted points. If it's getting too busy, you replace it with a schematic or you break it up into multiple slides, figure out a way to reduce it, keep it as simple as possible. You want them focused on you and not reading your slides. Very, very important in a Zoom environment as well, right? How you want to do that. And then remember, people read from left to right. So when you think about putting things in and how you structure your slide, very important. So this one doesn't come across too well, but this is a deck that I saw recently that I really liked. And you see, there's not too many words on them, but what they are. They're schematically really well done. You see, when they're trying to do something more complicated, they use an arrow or a flow chart or something you can speak to relatively quickly is really, really important. So thinking about how you structure your deck in those environments is really, really important. You obviously don't want to do this. This is a bit of a joke, so you don't have to read them. But if you read them all, they're saying, like, this doesn't even seem to be that many words. This is awful for the audience, right? So you've got a slide that looks like this, get rid of it. The problem we often use slides like this is when we don't know our content that well. We've all been in that situation where we're presenting something we're not an expert in, and then you need your slides to really lean on. So in those cases, maybe not to embarrass yourself, you have to do it, but better off to learn your material really well and present it in a much, much stronger way. How do you avoid it? Well, keep it very, very simple, fewer words, that's good. The idea of a leave behind is great. So something that I've done a lot of in my career is you may present a 9-slide version because you've got 15 minutes, then you leave them with send it afterwards, leave it with them, whatever, a PDF that may be 70 slides, that's got a lot more depth to it. And so those that are actually interested will know more. And even if they don't read it, they know there's more behind what you presented. They know you've done your background versus rushing, trying to squish so much in, looking like you don't know what you're doing because you're trying to get through some stuff, trying to explain a difficult slide in a few minutes. And that's the key point at the bottom. This is really key. Schematics are so powerful where you've got some data well presented, but only if you have enough time to do it. So if you've heard that famous 1 minute per slide rule, that works for these slides. If you put something deeper, I say 3 to 5 minutes. So if you present a slide, and I just grabbed, this is a picture from the internet, it's nothing special. That was a nice picture. But you see the slide she's got there, right? That's the kind of slide you cannot present in a minute. I don't know what's even on it, but look at all. But if you say, hey, this is my key slide, I'm going to spend 4 minutes on it, then you can go with the schematic. Otherwise, you want to keep them nice and lean and that kind of style, right? Pictures, hugely powerful. We often kind of ignore them. You see, I've used lots of them. I mean, as a Canadian basketball fan, I don't know if you know when the Toronto Raptors won and Kawhi Leonard scored this incredible basket that bounced around for about 5 seconds. Anyone you show this to in the Toronto area, it immediately sends a powerful, emotional, winning kind of signal. So those kind of pictures can be so powerful and can replace an entire slide that you can then talk to, sets an emotion, and they're focused on you, not your words. Your voice is also important. And obviously in the online environment as well, you got to be careful. People can control their sound, but you want your voice to be strong and clear and good. As you probably gathered, I often get critique for speaking too fast. I work at it, but it's a challenge for me. You try to figure out what's good and what's not. So this is from parenting, if you can believe it. But really, that inside voice whispering, you've all been to presentations where you can't hear the person. They're hard to make out. So it's that kind of, like I'm doing now, this louder presentation, clear voice. You don't want to yell, but you want to be that level just below your talking voice. Very, very important. Monotone is horrible. I mean, I was like that when I was younger, probably like a lot of people when they first presenting. You work at it, like intonation, excitement, storytelling, like we talked up front. Get into it, show passion. Like you want the freaking job. You want the contract. You want the supplier. You want the deal. You want to win. Very, very important, right? So monotone has got to go. And if you tell people, I do this as an instructor, but if you tell people, often people don't even know or realize that that's kind of piece. Another huge one is the filler words, right? And there's so many of them, and we all do it. The odd time they're useful or it's okay, but I have students sometimes I will count, right? MBA students, they say, no, you said 47 times in your 10-minute presentation. They say, no, I didn't. And then you play back, yes, you did. Wow. And so what's happening is they just get in this habit of saying things. It's and people say, oh, I could never get over that. It's a problem. No, everybody can solve it. And the reason is very simple. It's this idea of a pause, right? And so what you're doing when you're saying or or so or drag is you're in a presentation where you forgot something. Your brain is trying to catch up. You're under pressure. You're nervous, whatever the case may be. So you start to do these fillers. The best speakers just adopt for a pause. And a pause can be very effective. It doesn't show that you're lost, doesn't show that you don't know what you're doing. It just allows for a very thing. And I just put a copy of some great speakers here. And I mean, Obama is one who gets a lot of credit recently. Whether you like his politics or not, the man is an extraordinary speaker and uses the pause so well. I had to throw a Canadian at the bottom, but Pierre Trudeau is a famous Canadian prime minister. And there's Margaret Thatcher, a famous British prime minister. And they also both brilliant speakers. Ever watch any of YouTube? And they use the pause, like sometimes just to keep people on their toes. And Oprah is one who gets a lot of credit too. She's just uses it extraordinarily. So you never hear these people say or ah. And when they're lost, you don't think they're lost. They look pensive. They look smart. They look like they're thinking, look like they're waiting for their audience to react. Pause. The best way to kind of deal with those filler words. And if you're not sure if you do it, if you don't have a professor that's willing to do that, have someone you trust. Present to them, your mom, your boyfriend, your girlfriend. I'd say your dog, but your dog will give you much feedback. And talk to them and say, how often did I say stuff? What's my filler word? Is it an ah, an a so? What do I do when I get nervous? And pick a topic where you're going to get lost. You're going to panic a little bit. And you see and then you can start to fix it, right? Once you know, you can start to fix it and your skills can come up enormously. A couple last ones that I'll wrap up. One is be comfortable. So people say, should you stand straight? Should you walk around? Should your hands be in your pocket? There's no rule. The rule is what works for you. Like you probably even see it on my screen. I speak with my hands. I used to try to not. Now I just embrace it, right? You want to be, and when I like to walk around when I'm in a room, I walk around. And so whatever makes you comfortable, you will speak better. Now, if it's really awkward, again, get someone to look at you because, hey, you keep touching your ear and going like this when you speak, whatever. You want someone to fix that, but you stay in this very, very comfortable zone. And then you can see the pieces below. So some of us have twitches. I had one for a long time till someone kind of talked to me about it, where you actually would do something when you're nervous. And the neat thing about speaking when you're nervous, like a lot of us, I not anymore, but I used to be, you're dying inside, right? Just dying inside. Most people cannot even tell on the outside. You may have a little quiver in your voice, maybe you have a little sweat on your brow, but unless you have some kind of gesture that gives it away, like shaking or holding your hands, people can't tell. And once you start to realize that, you start to get more confident and then you get over it. And then you're like, why was I ever nervous? And so many students that I work with are able to get over this. And then you're so much more powerful in this particular situation. And the last one, and there's a gazillion things written on how to dress for an interview, depending which gender you are, depending on the situation, all those kind of things. And there's a lot of strategy to it, and it's very, very important. And it's challenging too, and you have to be careful. And how do you want to present yourself? At the end of the day, you want to be very, very strategic, and you want to be in something that you feel comfortable in. So back to what we talked about before, if you've never worn a three-piece suit in your life and you're going to this big job interview, don't go buy a three-piece suit and wonder why you feel nervous about it. Like something that you're comfortable in. Obviously, you have to dress for the job. So if you're going to a law firm to work as their marketing director, you're going to wear a suit, and a very expensive one. If you're going to a tech firm, do a bit of research. If you wear a suit, they're not going to like you. You're going to want to, dress down a little bit. Maybe you bring a jacket, but maybe it's over a black t-shirt or something like that, or whatever the case may be. I won't comment on the female side, but I'm sure Jamie can help females that want those kind of pieces. But again, it's a little simpler for males than females, but you really want to think about how you want to present yourself, the culture of the company, who your audience is. So quite simply, if you're getting interviewed by 6 white men in their 60s, you would dress and behave a little bit different if you're getting interviewed by 6 Black women in their 20s, right? Very different vibe, very different environment. And so you want to think about all of those kind of things. One I really like at the 3rd and 4th ones there, the 4th and 5th ones there, are understanding the venue you're in. This would be the Zoom environment versus what kind of an in-person one. So I've done some interviews, like a dean's interview, where they literally put you in a chair in the middle of a room with 35 people around you firing you questions. Well, you want to be pretty comfortable in what you're wearing and how you're looking, and you might be sweating underneath, all those kind of things. So you want to think about that differently than if it's a one-on-one setting in a casual environment. What's the temperature that day, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then again, don't try to be something you're not, and how you kind of want to do it. So that's the list. That's the presentation. And hopefully those things you find helpful. And I think, Connor, I would open up if there's any quick questions or on that topic, and then we will stop recording and go in camera. I don't know, Connor, if you want to add anything or if there's any questions.
No, I actually had a question off the top to get us started if other people are still thinking about their questions. But mine is, obviously we want to, present to win every time. But what about those times where we like flop? Like, how would you save that? Let's say you're in the elevator, you forget your pitch, or you're stumbling around, or I know you've talked about Murphy's Law at the start, but what are some, like, maybe you've had an experience like that? I know for me, when I was 15, I was applying for my first job ever, right? And I've never had a job interview before that. And it was terrible, right? I felt embarrassed because I was like, this is terrible. So what would your like one or two quick tips to sort of get out of that situation to sort of save it if possible?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think if you can see it coming, so let's say you get that opportunity, right? And you're with the CEO and let's say you've got some product you want to pitch, or you're interested in some job that's coming up, and how am I going to take advantage of this opportunity to kind of get it across? So if it's an informal setting versus a formal setting, I think in an informal setting, I would revert to build the relationship first. And so something I've learned in the fundraising part of my life is often you go into these meetings, right? And there's some pressure on you to make a pitch, right? Like you should be pitching for the money. We're after this individual for this, whether it's a donation, whether it's a sponsorship, whether it's this kind of thing. And if it's not right, you need to just back off. I learned this from mentor, and just relationship build, get to know them. So if you're feeling that pressure there, that would be the first thing I would say in that informal environment. There's nothing wrong with just backing it off. If you know they like golf, ask them about golf. Talk about something generic. If it's a music thing or something that's happening in politics or whatever it is that might just get you calmer and talking to them, and save that for the next time. That'd be the first part. If it was a formal environment, which I think sounds like your job pitch one was, you're probably cooked if you've really blown the job interview, right? And but I think then you say, okay, how do I take this as a learning experience for next time? I mean, one of the things, and we'll talk about this in the career development workshop, and a lot of you know this, but whenever you go for a career job, my experience, I mean, very good people or lucky people get the first one, but you apply for hundreds of jobs. You get a dozen callbacks, you get 3 or 4 interviews, and eventually you find a job. When I finished my MBA, I tracked it. So remember, you think you're done my MBA, I'm a superstar. Well, I had 400 things I applied for, and again, eventually got an offer, and it took 4 months. So I think, okay, so now I've blown it. Let's just take the pressure off and let's practice. Like, let's now try some of these Q&As and do different things. One of the things I've really learned, and this was part of my Dean's Hunt experience, which took a long time, is you start to get used to the questions, and you start to get more common thinking about what they're going to look for. You get more aware of issues like DEI or corporate culture, how to present yourself, or when to stay very formal and when to open it up, and all these kind of different things become important. So I would then flip and say, I think in that environment, as you said, you're done, but let's just get some learning out of this, is how I think I would approach those couple of things. Thank you. Anyone else?
Yeah,
a lot of you are good. We're good.
It looks like we had a question from the audience. Any advice on how to stop saying so much besides, taking a pause? Any other things that have worked for you? Yeah.
So a couple of things are really, and I think, and for me, it was also through like a lot of work with different students. And so there's a few. So one thing is and I mentioned talking to other people. The other thing is you can self-record. If you're really that concerned about other people, and if you're the kind of person that's saying a lot of ums or so, the odd one's okay, but a lot, you're probably a nervous presenter, or inside you've got a lot of nerves. And so you want to work through that. So one thing is to just record yourself, practice it, and try to say less and less and less. And you'll start becoming aware of when you actually do it. And it's usually when you get really, really nervous. And so I actually had one student last year, an undergraduate student, who was unbelievable. He would get so nervous. He would say 4 or 5 times every sentence. And so I said, well, maybe I can, I'm no speech pathologist, but maybe I can work with you to help do it. And so what we would do is just go through some different exercises and cases, and I would pick things and just say, hey, I'm just going to listen to you present, but you have to do the work and solve this particular case and come back to me with your answer. And simply because I was a professor, I think he felt a bit of nerves each time, and he would work through it, and he would get these periods where he would go really, really well. And then it would all fall to pieces. He would get nervous again. And then I would start to ask him, well, what did you get nervous about? And what was happening in your head? And so then he started being aware when he got way behind, he started to panic. He knew that it was happening. And so he never got to be perfect, but he definitely reduced it a lot in that course. And hopefully he's continued to work on it soon. Being aware of what state my mind is in when we're doing. It's like being an athlete, right? Like, you know how your body's feeling at that point in time of performing, right? If you realize, oh my God, I'm nervous. I'm really like my heart, I don't know if anyone gets nervous presenting, but I know early on, my heart would start pounding. Like I'd feel my heart pounding in my head, right? And your hands get a little bit sweaty. That's when you start making those kind of mistakes. So that awareness of where that particular piece could go. And then I think the last one I would say would just be getting out there and doing it. And so going to places where you don't have quite as much pressure, but you'll have the opportunity to feel a place where you might get nervous. So do you join some kind of club where you're going to talk to strangers? Like it could be a role-playing club or a chess club or a language club or anything. Like you get yourself out there around, heck, it could be a dating group. Who knows? Get yourself out there around other people where you're going to be forced to speak in that environment to build your comfort. I think would be the last thing I think would say to that question. But yeah, and then I think using mentors and classmates and family and trusted people to kind of help you. It is such an important skill for anything that we want to do. And interestingly, as we got more digital, a lot of us thought it was going to be less important. It's actually become more important because we're all in these kind of environments right now where you don't have a lot of nonverbal cues anymore, right?
Great. And that actually leads me into my next question from the audience, which is about the nonverbals and what type of body language should you be presenting in a job interview? And is it dependent on the industry or work environment that you're in?
Yeah, great question. And I think, I won't claim any expertise, but I'll give you certainly my experience. There's a couple of things that come to mind. One is the world has really changed, right? And so when I was first looking for jobs 20 years ago, you would answer that question very differently than you would today. Inclusion and equity and gender equality and all these kind of things have really changed way for the better, how a lot of these things are perceived. So you wouldn't try to, the dress for success, or you may try to, dress in a certain way for certain gender groups. Those kind of things are all, you don't want to go there. If you're seen as being insensitive in any way to any of those things right now, it's unlikely to be successful. Now, maybe in certain careers, but not the ones in the business world that we're going to be a part of. So I think you want to think about that particular piece. Now you flip it and you think, okay, well, by industry. And so very, very important. So if I'm applying, and I would never get hired in that world, you can see how I dress. Let's say I had a chance to work in the fashion industry, right? Let's say you're being hired by L'Oreal and you're going in for a marketing director position, right? And you get interviewed and you're going into their head office in Paris. My goodness, you better be dressed appropriately, right? You're going to want to think about, is this the right brand? Is it the right style? Am I up to date? Am I going to, because how is it going to work otherwise? Similarly, if we talked about high tech or these kind of worlds that are much more casual, they're going to be turned off by a suit. But if you're going to a banking interview in New York City, they're going to expect that you're going to wear a suit. The other thing I think is important is to think about dressing for the interview, how you probably would for the job going forward. So I think one thing that you talk about job retention, one thing that I think frustrates some hiring committees and managers is you present yourself in a certain way at the interview, and then all of a sudden you're completely different when the job starts, and you wonder why you get fired 3 months later, right? I think if you're presenting yourself in a way that's going to fit with that environment, you want to stick with that kind of going forward. I think all that being said, very tactically, the most important thing, and I said this in the be comfortable, is be comfortable in your skin and within knowing the culture and knowing what they want to see and knowing the company and the industry, but presenting yourself in the best way. Because if you're comfortable, you will come across much, much, much stronger. And remember, and I should have said this up front, there's a lot of research now that the very smart hiring organization, so strategic HR stuff, right? A lot of you know this, strategic HR stuff. The interview is the final piece. So academics and government is different. But in the private sector, the organization that really knows what they're doing picks the best candidate, not based on the interview. Like that's because that's shown not to be most successful. The best predictor of success is previous success, right? So if you want someone who's going to sell your widgets in a B2B environment, get someone who's successfully sold your widgets in a B2B environment. The interview then becomes, does this person, does she or he fit with our culture? And so that becomes even more pressure because then it's kind of your job to lose. Do people like you? Do you fit in? So you even have to think even more carefully to that question about how you might want to fit in with that particular organization. So some tips there would be, can you find a way to, connect with that organization beyond the interviews? If you've never been to their offices before, don't know anyone that's worked there, can you go by and check it out? How do people look? How do they behave? How do they dress? What kind of people are there? And would I fit in? And those kind of things can be little tricks there too. But again, being comfortable would be the most important. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, I believe you hit all parts of it. The body language, industry and stuff like that. So that's all I had for questions.
Oh, I didn't. Yeah, sorry. Let me talk about body language. I don't think I did mention the body language piece. So I think that's really reliant on confidence, right? And so I think this comes back to the previous question, and we talked about that a lot in the presentation, is if you're nervous and these kind of things, you really want to work through that in class, right? In other environments, and those things we talked about in formal environments, so you're confident, because that will really come across. And I mean, I mentioned the 4-day dean's interviews. Like when you go for any kind of major career job, they'll send you on a lunch and a coffee with different people. And you may be meeting with 3 people who would be your peers, but they're also evaluating you. And everybody takes all that in, right? You might go with different groups. And so you want your body language, your confidence to be similar and come across in all environments. And there's no way you can keep up a charade for an 8-hour day in different environments. So you need to have that kind of confidence ahead of time, I think is an important point too. Well, that ends our first Dean's Huddle on Sunday night. Hope it was better than football. And thanks for attending. And I'm really looking forward to next week when we're going to delve into name, image, and likeness in the NCAA, which is applications across businesses and across industries for how individuals can benefit from brands' use of their own names, images, and likenesses. See you soon. Thank you.